The country is commemorating Human Rights Day. The 21st of March was declared a public holiday by the democratic government to honor those who died fighting for our rights in the 1960 Sharpeville Massacre. Now, earlier today, the Thuma Foundation hosted a dialogue to unpack how we can use our vote to strengthen democracy and the advancement of human rights. Joining me now is Professor Thuli Madonsela, who is the patron of the foundation. Good evening, and thanks very much for your time. The Thuma Foundation, a peculiar name, I say, in the context of the president's rallying cry and campaign of Thuma Mina.
Well, thank you for this golden opportunity. Well, it's a good thing that the president started the Thuma Mina campaign. Thuma is Thuli Madonsela, but we shortened it to Thuma. And incidentally, when we introduced the name at the beginning of 2017, we did say that although it's Thuli Madonsela, but Thuma means if there's a job that must be done, let me do it. And our target is young people and other disaffected groups to say, if democracy is going to work for all, make it do so.
The question, I guess, is how, and if I got this correctly, the purpose of today's dialogue was to have a conversation among or with young people, looking at how we can all use our vote to strengthen democracy.
And certainly the majority of voters are young people, and statistics even show that the majority within that group are young black women. But this is the group that tends not to vote. A lot of them are not even registered to vote, but even those that have registered may not vote. When we interview them, and what I also discovered as Pub Protector was that a lot of young people believe that the system is so corrupted that it's no use voting. The results are predictable, and there's nothing you can do to change the way things are done so that the democracy dividend or the fruits of democracy are enjoyed.
But are they correct, at least in one sense?
No, they're not correct. I think the way we have dealt with democracy since the dawn of democracy was understanding it to mean that democracy is that people vote and then they go to sleep. Then we leave everything to politicians, lawyers, and the media, because the media never sleeps. It keeps watching democracy day in, day out. And then we went to sleep. But democracy is people's government, people's power, and people should be there from the determination of what should be the values undergirding democracy. What kind of people should be elected in a democracy? What should be the agenda for change, and how do we monitor that? And yes.
So you're not really talking about the vote itself, but what happens beyond the voting process, because once every person on the 8th of May by 7 o'clock would have cast their ballots, right? There is really nothing that anybody can do but to watch the results being counted, the numbers coming on the board, and then voila, the outcome is the outcome. There's really nothing that you can do. So in this dialogue, what then were you telling those people to do?
Well, firstly is we are now going to vote. As you go to vote, look at entry points for how can you make sure that those who are voted carry your dreams. Politicians tend to promise people what they want the people to want, but they don't promise people everything that the Constitution has promised. Today's dialogue was about bridging the gap between the constitutional promise and political party promises. And then about people using entry points, like one of our projects is going to be a letter, Dear Presidents, writing to all of these presidents and asking them to bridge the gap between what they're promising and what they should be promising. But thereafter, people don't lie back. By the 25th, we'll have these letters. We hope we'll have 100,000 letters. By the 25th, those letters will be out, and people will then have listened to parties when they vote on the 8th.
And every politician in their right mind will say yes, 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 yes to everything that you're asking them to do.
Brilliant. We would love them to do exactly that, because then people become part of monitoring democracy. We're saying young people, instead of staying out there waiting until things are broken. For example, Ngandla, which is one of the things people know, didn't happen in one day. This matter was raised by the Mail and Guardian in 2009. The matter was only investigation from 2013. Where were the people? People need to be there to find out what did we put on the agenda, are we implementing the agenda for change? And we are going to be working with all of the legacy foundations to train people to understand how state architecture works and where are the entry points. But this is the deal for you. Local government elections are coming because we're making people the monitors of their own democracy and giving these political parties feedback every 3 months. But we're making people aware that whoever promised what they're not delivering, you have a chance in the local government elections to give them what they deserve.
Now, how often do you do these dialogues with this army of young people who are getting into this, I don't want to say subversive project, you know, of trying to look at how best to hold our politicians accountable? What are the other things? 100,000 letters you're talking about now. What happens next? What happens after the election? Are these people you are in constant touch with, and doing what exactly, if that is the case?
Okay, the Thuma Foundation is a democracy, literacy, and leadership foundation. It has several projects under a system we refer to as DART. We have these democracy dialogues and voices of democracy, where it's about engaging about the meaning of democracy. What should a functional democracy look like? What should it do? And how do we make sure no one is left behind? Another project is advocacy, where we help people, mostly legal issues. For example, the UNISA matter, we were involved in it, and we're still involved in it. And there are others, though, that have panned out very well. We don't just deal with the state. We dealt with Standard Bank with a very positive result on the issue of mortgages and people being treated badly. We deal with access, and we've helped students with these matters of access and the left-behind students. But we're still working on an Action for Inclusion campaign there to broaden the access. And in that regard, I would like to thank Anglo Ashanti. It's one of the companies that responded to that campaign for students who are excluded for financial reasons. Then we do research. The last one is we also train, we're working with communities, bottoms up, lift themselves up, but then that's where at local government level where they can check the budget and say, this is how we want to develop in terms of sustainable development goals. This is what you're supposed to do to meet us halfway. How do we make sure that we get our democracy dividend? And we're looking at 3,700 wards.
But, I mean, we've run out of time, but I want to ask you this. How deep or wide do your conversations go? And I'm asking this because where I just came from a few hours ago, the leader of one political party was talking about how wrong he thinks it is for this day to be called Human Rights Day, because you don't get that, for example, when the Jews are talking about the Holocaust. From where he stands or sits, this was about white people who killed black people, and it should be remembered as such.
I do think that he may be right about that we may reconsider naming March 21 Human Rights Day. Also because at the level of the UN, it was International Day of Against Racism. And seemingly at a global level, we're all happy to deal with gender issues, we're all happy to deal with LGBTI issues. But on the issue of race, I think we're backsliding, and there may be an issue there about making sure how do we build racially inclusive and racially harmonious societies, but also just lastly about how deep. We're looking at socio-economic inclusion in all areas, the economy, health, education. The dialogue that we had was just one of many that we're having. At the University of Stellenbosch, we also have something that we call a social justice cafe, and we had one here where it was now not just, dear Mr. President, it was also what are we, the rest of us of society, going to bring to the table to end inequality and poverty by 2030.
Okay, that's what we're going to leave it for this evening. Thanks very much for coming through.